Hello and welcome back to another episode of B&B War Stories. I'm your host, Nick Laidlaw. Today we're going to hear 3 stories about the fighting in the trenches on the eastern front of Ukraine. 2 Ukrainian stories and 1 Russian one. Again, because of my close relationship with Ukrainian soldiers, I did not personally interview and document the story from the Russian soldier. It was documented on my behalf by a friend of mine who resides in Russia. Let's dive right in with our first story from a Ukrainian soldier's experience in the Crimea forest. There was information that the enemy was moving his troops closer to the front line, tanks and infantry. Our troops were ready to meet them. It was Christmas, a big holiday, and approximately 3 or 4 in the morning, artillery bombardment of the front line in rear positions began, grad, mortars, and barrel artillery. Closer to the morning, demining machines called UR-77s came very quickly to the first line of the enemy side. They made way for the tanks. Closer to dawn, tanks began moving closer to the front line, and large concentrations of enemy infantry were spotted using drones. 3 tanks were driving toward us. According to the enemy's idea, they wanted to hit us in the front from the flanks and along the middle of the line. The first tank that was supposed to drive in from the right flank got hit by a mine. Being heavily damaged, their tankers took it in the direction of their own positions. Later, that same tank was destroyed with the help of an anti-aircraft gun. The second tank entering the middle of the line was spotted in advance. Information about it was passed on to the infantry holding the defense. The infantry opened fire in the direction of the tank with anti-tank weapons. One of the rockets almost skipped across the top of the tank, and it began to drive away in reverse, and fell into its own trench line where it got stuck. Later, it was also hit by anti-tank missiles. The distance of this tank from our trenches was approximately 100 to 150 meters from our front line. The third tank, at great speed, still managed to reach the front line of our forces. It was carrying infantry on board, 8 men of an assault group. The tank, having entered the trench, immediately received a shot from the RPG-7 in its side. The tank was trying to back up, but it was not able to do so. Several stormtroopers of the enemy were immediately wounded and killed at the moment of disembarking from the tank. At this time, all those who remained alive ran into the trench line, where they occupied sectors of our own lines. The tankers also began to leave the tank, and at that moment, drones began to drop grenades onto it. Later, it caught fire and blew up. In this photo, you can see the remains of those who died immediately upon landing and were lying next to the tank. Many bodies were flown into the air by the explosion. Our troops advanced along the trench to the enemy's assault group. A melee began. But in the end, our troops captured 3 Russian soldiers and killed the others. Also, I'd like to note, since the beginning of the assault, there was a very large concentration of drones and rockets in the sky. After that, there were no more attempts to storm this area for the rest of the day. Many of you know me from Instagram. I've been documenting stories of soldiers primarily remotely and sometimes on location for 3 years. I've since traveled to Ukraine and Israel to document stories from witnesses and participants of war. I would love to do this full time. At the moment, I split my time between doing B&B and being a teacher. So in an attempt to help myself do this full time, I've started a Patreon. If you think what I'm doing is worth $5 a month or maybe even more, please consider checking out the link and helping me do this full time. This next story comes from a rather viral video from November of 2022. His name is Ruslan, callsign Predator. The day was as ordinary as possible. Nothing foreshadowed that anything could happen. My partner and I took up the post and defended for an hour and a half. There was literally a half an hour before we were to be relieved to go to rest, but we heard the hum of the BMP-2. Thinking what it was, something far away, I personally decided to prepare an anti-tank weapon. After literally 10 seconds, they came to us on the radio and tried to warn us that that same BMP-2 was moving in our direction. We didn't really understand what they told us on the radio, since the Russians were jamming the connection. When they repeated the message on the radio to us, that the equipment was moving toward us, it was already 5 meters away. And what you saw in the video began.
Спроси у Алекса, как дела и что делать дальше.
In the end, we repelled the attack. Those who could survive ran away, and everyone else is still laying dead. Everything is fine with my partner. At that moment, he was shell-shocked, but still, he was able to help me. He did everything that I said, listened, and followed my orders, for which many thanks to him. This last story is from a Russian soldier, also fighting in roughly the same area as the soldier in our first story. He says, I returned some days ago, and it still feels strange being back. I spent some time in the Crimea forest front line, and it was very difficult fighting there. Everyone throws artillery back and forth, ours and theirs. The earth shakes, and it's quite nasty. I'm not a coward, but any man with 2 eyes and 2 ears would be afraid of artillery and tank shots. My time at the front line was easy compared to what it could have been. No assaults for us. Just hold our frontline trenches and keep the enemy held in theirs. But this doesn't mean that there was no fighting. Oftentimes there was fighting. Mostly our artillery and tanks and drones fighting theirs. The trenches of our soldiers and of the Ukrainians were not very close, and therefore not many direct shooting battles took place, but still, everyone was fired upon by something. One of the enemy vehicles, I don't know which kind, cut a tree down behind me in the trenches with explosive shots, and the tree collapsed on top of me. A part of the branch pierced my shoulder, and that's how I ended up in the hospital. After my shoulder was pierced, I was taken to a dugout to wait for the shooting to be done. Afterwards, I was placed on an ATV and driven through the forest until I reached the evacuation point. I'll be honest, I have mixed feelings. I would like to have finished my deployment, but I am glad to be far away from that place. I've been discharged for 30 days, and it's difficult to adjust. I move my bed in my father's house to the wall, so my back touches the wall as I sleep. And I had to leave the club with my girlfriend because the music vibrations reminded me too much of the explosion from artillery and tanks. This is from a soldier from the 6th Separate Guards Motor Rifle Brigade from the middle of December. Just 3 quick stories for this video. Again, if you like what I'm doing, make sure to like and subscribe, leave a comment, share, help the algorithm. I'd really love to be able to do this full time, and growing the page is literally the best way to do that. So as always, every soldier has a story, and every story deserves to be told. Thanks for watching.